Hi everybody and welcome to another F Word. It's a filmed podcast that inspires a more vibrant, healthy and wealthier 50-plus lifestyle. I'm your host, Vital Germain. I am 56 years old, I look good and I feel even better. Please don't hate. Today we are going to get raw. We're going to do some deep dives into some heavy relevant topics. My first guest is all the way from the United Kingdom because we are going global. Please let's welcome all the way from the United Kingdom, my dear old friend, Steve Brown. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Jake. It's great to see you again.
It has been many years. I think it's been about 30 years since we were last together in the United Kingdom. You recently came out to visit. Very quickly, Steve, how old are you?
66.
66. You qualify for this podcast. Congratulations. We're going to do some serious talking today. A couple of things that I really want to touch on is purpose, a deep sense of purpose, why we do what we do. You went through a really substantial life change that when I found out about it absolutely blew my mind. I wanted to get into that, but before we do, let me sort of quickly backtrack to your childhood. What did you want to be when you were 7 years old, if you can remember that far?
Oh, I can very vividly remember. I wanted to be a doctor from the time I was 4.
Wow. So the reason why I asked that question, over the years as a coach, as a speaker, I've documented the reasons what people wanted to be when they were 7 years old and try and find the connection to how it ties into what they are currently doing. And 90% of the time there is a direct correlation to that journey. So let's dive into a more profound question. Life is a long journey. We have trials and tribulations. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know today, what are a couple of things that you would either do differently or do more of? It can be on a romantic level. Well, I should have spent more time with loved ones. I should have invested more time in this. I wish I hadn't. I mean, what are some things that you would do differently?
I think, well, we want to be a bit profound about things. I mean, I guess I would have wanted to have a more kind of open and a more verbal relationship with my parents, really. You know, I had a perfectly happy childhood, and I don't want to kind of get into, give the impression that I had some kind of terrible limited childhood. That wouldn't be true. But I mean, this was in the 50s and 60s, different kind of cultural time, and I didn't really ever have any seriously deep conversations. I think with my parents at a kind of more personal level, or if I did, I don't really recall them. And I think that's a pity. I mean, we might come later on to talk about this more specifically, but I remember when I was with my dad as he was dying, there were things which I would have liked to have been able to, not so much say at that point, but I felt at that point there were things which I would have liked to have had a longer kind of so what I'm looking for, a more extensive basis of shared talking, if you like, on which to pin that deathbed scene, if I can put it that way. It just felt like this was the most profound time I'd ever had with my dad. But it was not based on anything, not on, I couldn't say, what we were talking about last week, or we were talking about last year. There wasn't any really of that to be done. And that I think was a pity.
But I think it's a really relevant answer, because one of the recurring themes in life as we get into the second chapter of our journey, and we sort of start counting down the years, is that we look back and we realize that maybe we didn't say enough to certain people, maybe we didn't spend enough time. And there's that element of, if only I'd said this, to your point, if only I'd had deeper conversations. Yeah. So if you could go back, what are some things that you would have done other than maybe spend more time, but really dig deep and say, well, there were times when as a child, I wish he'd have given me this, or there were times as a child, I wish I'd given him that. And then how does that relate to you now? You're a parent, you're a father. What lessons did you learn as a result of that journey? And how do you now implement that as a parent?
I mean, I think this sounds terribly sort of trite and maybe sentimental, but I can't remember any time when I said to my dad, I love you. And I can't remember him ever saying that to me. And that is not about there not having been love in the relationship. It's about not never being explicit, never spoken about in a direct and kind of open way. And I think that's sad. And I've certainly tried to make sure that I don't do that with my son Jamal. You know, that I say that to him quite frequently.
Yeah.
And that was something which I, you know, I'm not just saying it because I didn't say it to my dad. I'm saying it because I mean it and it comes out naturally. But it was something which I wanted to make sure was part of our relationship.
I love that. Sort of a very trivial question, Steve, in terms of the age bracket that we're in. Is aging, is it pain or is it poetry? How's it been for you, pain or poetry in getting older?
Well, like most things in life, it's kind of, you know, double-edged or multiply-edged, you know, multifaceted.
Yeah.
And there are things that, you know, my memory isn't what it used to be and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's like everybody else, and I forget things, I forget words, which is extremely annoying, excruciatingly annoying.
Yeah.
Slightly scary too, because my mum died of dementia, and you know, her mum did. So every now and again I think, oh my God, this is the beginning of some terrible decline.
Yeah.
Hopefully not. So there's those sorts of things.
So it's a
I've
combination.
really made, sorry?
So it's a combination. There are elements of pain,
Exactly.
but there's also the poetry to look forward to.
Exactly, but I also think, you know, I've spent a lot of my, not a lot of my time, that's an exaggeration, but I've always been determined to stay as healthy as I can.
Yeah,
And,
we're gonna get into that. I want to talk about how have you found ways to stay healthy, whether that is emotionally, physically, spiritually, intellectually. Before we get there, you mentioned some things sort of about your father that maybe there are certain things that you didn't say, but in general, in life, this is a very delicate topic for people to answer. Do you have any regrets, like major regrets that, you know what, I really messed up? Oh, if only I had not done that, my life would be so different. What were you thinking, Steve? Do you have any moments of life that were like absolute regrets?
How long is this podcast? No, but I think that I suppose regrets are pointless in that sense, and I think so. The things that I'm about to just talk about, to say that I regret them in some kind of pained way would be to overstate it. But I think that there are aspects of my life, if you like, which I think could have been different and perhaps ought to have been different. And one of those things, I think, is that I don't think I've ever developed my intellectual capacity as much as I should have done, or used it in the way that I could have done. And you know, I can remember at school that broadly speaking, I was as lazy as they come. And it didn't matter because I had enough brains to make it not matter. And so I kind of glided through school. I did very well academically at school, but I never did a stroke. And of course, I can remember, to give you an example, because I was wanting to be a doctor, I did A-levels at chemistry and physics with maths.
Oh, you were a smart kid. Look at you, A-levels, yeah.
And I can remember now, absolutely vividly, the night before my biology A-level. A-levels in England always happen in the summer, and it's always beautiful weather. Just, you know, because God's a bastard. And and on that night, the night before my biology exam, central to my kind of plans for the future, I opened my biology textbook, and I can remember just looking at a diagram of the liver. And my older brother said to me, "Oh, let's go and play cricket." I said, "Yeah, okay." And I'm not joking, that 5-minute look at the diagram of the liver was the totality of the revision that I did for A-level.
Wow.
That is all I did.
Good for you. You know, my only memory of chemistry class, because I did not like chemistry, and I was a bit of a brat at an old boys Catholic school called Salesian College, which I remember you coming to pick me up a couple of times. But the moment that I remember the most was, other than getting kicked out a couple of times, there was one experiment we did in the lab, and I can't remember what the two elements were, but we were told to not mix them because they would create this, you know, elaborated puff of smoke. So my friend He goes and pours one of the elements down one of the drains on like table 3 over there, pours a lot of it down, the other element down this table over here, comes back to his seat and he just says, wait, watch this. And about 2 or 3 minutes in, you start seeing this smoke come out of the sink, and we basically had to evacuate the class.
That is scary, you know.
And that's all I remember about chemistry.
I did exactly the same thing. Me and my friends did exactly the same thing in our chemistry class. And I can tell you what the things were. Concentrated hydrochloric acid, concentrated ammonia.
I think that was it.
And we had sinks which shared a drainage, so that they eventually met, but not for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And because they were concentrated chemicals, if you turn on the taps, it just made the smoke come out faster.
That's right.
And
By
so
the way,
the chemistry teacher would come and turn the taps on. Brilliant.
By the
And
way,
you
Steve,
did the same thing, I can't believe that.
hydrochloric acid, is that HCl?
HCl, yes.
I still remember. I
And
love-
ammonia? Ammonia? Come on.
Wow,
What's
ammonia. No, I can't remember ammonia. I can't remember ammonia.
NH4.
NH4, yeah, there you go. Good memories. I want to talk about some of the memories that we had, just very quickly allowing people in to our journey, and why I really decided that it was important to bring you on the show is that in getting older, and I look back on my personal journey, and I encourage people to look back on your personal journey, there are some people in your life who were pivotal, who were defining, who either prevented you from going down a certain path or who elevated you by inspiring you to go down a certain path. I grew up in childcare, sexually abusive father, alcoholic mother, surrounded by total dysfunction, teenage prostitution, attempted suicides, drug addiction, you name it. And you weren't officially my social worker, but if I'm correct, Steve, at the time you were a community worker. A youth worker. And you weren't assigned to my case. I had a specific social worker assigned to my case because I was a number, a statistic waiting to happen. And we were talking about smoke, not to blow smoke up your ass or any ammonia, hydrochloric acid or ammonia, but to blow smoke up your ass, you were such a positive influence in my life. And I think back and think, had I not met you, I could be living a very different life, doing a very different podcast from a jail cell. And there's a Canadian motivational speaker called Drew Dudley, who he calls this lollipop moments, where we acknowledge something that somebody did. But here's the sad part. For the most part, we never let people know the impact they had on our lives, and they will never, ever know. I want to emotionally and officially say to you, Steve, thank you. And I'm going to get very deep and vulnerable here. I will argue in many ways you actually saved my life by the influence, the hope you gave me in my teenage years. And it kind of ties into something that you've gone through this incredible transformation. When you told me about this, I was like, Steve, is this the same Steve that I knew from back in London, Howard's Lane? You became a priest. What age did you become a priest?
Sorry, I'm being slightly distracted by my wife creeping around.
That's okay. Hello, loveliness. I remember meeting you. Good to see you again. Blowing you kisses too, love. Blowing you kisses too.
Take your computer and piss off.
So, Steve, when did you become a priest? At what age?
Well, I was what was I? I was 61.
61.
So this is a recent thing.
All right. How do you do that? Because most people at that age, they're jaded, they've lost drive, they've lost ambition, they've lost a sense of purpose, and here you are, you dive into this completely different lifestyle. You've got to navigate the challenges that come. How do you do that?
Well, you have to have you have to have a bit of understanding of the background.
Okay.
Yeah, in order to see where it didn't just come from nowhere. Actually, before I even met you, so a long time ago, 46 years ago, in fact, I had decided I was going to become a priest.
Yeah.
And I went through all the processes that you have to do, and kind of got through them all. But the church said, very wisely, I think, you can't just go from school to university to theological college to being a priest. You have to spend at least some time in whatever, the real world, the world outside.
Yeah.
And, for reasons I won't go into now, that 1 year became 30 years effectively, or 30 or 40 years. And that is how I became a youth worker. We met because of my being told that I had to spend a year doing something different. I went and became an adventure playground worker, things I don't think even exist anymore, in Lambeth. And
Lambeth is in London, by the way, for my US viewers. Lambeth is
in London.
Yeah.
And then I did various other youth work jobs, and as a result of which, the job which I had when you met me was about my third job, I think.
Right.
And so I was the reason I didn't actually pursue my vocation to be a priest at that time was because I thought I was doing something which is useful. And actually, in a way, it's extraordinary to hear you say what you said a little while ago, and it's obviously very, very moving and flattering, but also in a kind of weird way vindicating, because it clearly I was doing something important.
Yes.
Perhaps more important than I realised at the time. I don't want to talk about this in a kind of specifically religious sense, but the idea of being a priest is about feeling a calling to do something. It's a vocation.
A calling, it's a vocation, yes.
And of course, that's not the only vocation. Lots of vocations that people have. And so, although I didn't pursue it at that time, it went into what you might call kind of hibernation. It just went and buried itself and just slept for a very long time, but it didn't die.
But I want to tap that. I want to quickly tie that back into the question: what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old, and this is the connection that I've seen. You wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
What do doctors do? They save lives. They have a deep sense of purpose about caring and giving. And if you think about it, your journey has been exactly that. You have saved lives, mine included. There were a lot of other kids in the home who I watched the influence that you had. You gave them hope. You saved and changed lives. Everything that I know about you is about caring and giving and helping. And so it does actually tie into somewhat your 7-year-old aspirations. And I'm a firm believer that our true sense of purpose can be found in the innocence of our inner child. And you talked about this greater sense of purpose, but it still comes with immense, it has to come with sacrifice. Can you bring us into your world of what it cost emotionally? What was the sacrifice, the risk? Were you able to become a father, a priest?
Well, I think that the first thing which I think has to be acknowledged is that no motivations are pure. No motivations are one-sided.
Ayn Rand, Russian philosopher, objectivism, taps into that everything that we do, even if it's we give because it makes us feel good. So I completely get that.
Yeah, I think there's a degree of that, and there's a sense of some sense of self-realization, or that as you say, helps you to feel that you're doing something useful. And I suppose that I think is, although I wouldn't have expressed it like this when I was, before. I was 4 years old when I wanted to be a doctor. And I can't honestly tell you why I wanted to be a doctor when I was 4, but I just know that I know that it's true that I said that at that age. And I think that to some extent, there's an American educationist, a guy called John Holt, and he wrote a book called Escape from Childhood, which is
Escape. I'm going to write that down. Escape from Childhood.
Escape from Childhood. It's a very 70s thing, and it influenced me an awful lot when I was sort of in my early 20s, at the time that when I met you, basically, that kind of period. And in one of his books, I'm not sure if it actually was that book or one of the other books of his that I read, he had a chapter called "The Helping Hand Strikes Again." Wow. And what he was saying there was that lots of helping hands are actually dangerous. That this desire to help people can be a cover for something very different.
Ooh.
And I think that has really resonated with me, and kind of I feel it as a perpetual warning to myself, you know.
Is that code for I'm feeding my ego because I need to feel validation, a sense of meaning and purpose, so I'm going to use...
I think
I mean, let's keep it real.
yeah, I mean, I think the thing which what John Holt said about it, he used the sorry, it is a religious thing, but you know, the famous story of the Good Samaritan. Yeah. Yes. And to say that, you know, what is really important about that story is that the Good Samaritan didn't say to the guy who, you know, fallen among the thieves, well, you're clearly not capable of looking after yourself, so you shouldn't go out alone. And he didn't say, I'm going to stay here until you get better. He just left him to get better and paid somebody else to sort of, you know, he didn't create a dependent relationship with that person. And I think that's the key thing. He
didn't create a dependent relationship. Wow.
He served that person by making him free, not by making him dependent on him. Yeah. And that is absolutely critical. And, you know, that's what I've always tried to ensure that I didn't do, you know. And
Steve, you deserve an amen. Can I get an amen for Stephen Brown, Father Stephen Brown? I love that.
But I mean, it's really important, and it's a, you know, in my way of thinking about the world, because I'm a priest, I would say that's a very sinful way of behaving. You know, to make somebody dependent on you, to make them need your help, as opposed to you providing help that they need. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really, really important. So you know, you said that, you know, so some very kind and generous things about the effect I've had on your life and on other people's, but I hope you've never felt that I've made you some way, you know, that you owe me something. Does that make sense?
I've never felt indebted. I never felt like, oh, Steve, I need you. Don't go, please, don't abandon. No, because to your point, you never established, I viewed you just as a really good friend who just cared for me. And I think a fundamental human need is we all want to be loved. We want to be heard, seen, understood, cared for. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you did that in a way which I felt very healthy. I didn't feel that you didn't become a crutch. Here's what you did, Steve, and this is something that I try to implement as a coach, as a speaker. You inspire me. And I think that inspiration is void of strings. Here are some tools. Here's an experience that I have. Here's how I interact in society. Take from it what you like and do with it what you will, rather than the coach who says, hey, you need to do this, and without my advice, you're going to fail, which means that dependency of like, oh, I've got to keep doing what my coach tells me. And if my coach isn't in the stands, I won't be able to play my best game. You never remotely did that. And it's a very valid point, because I think a lot of parents, and it's a good question for parents out there if you're listening, have you done that to your kids? Have you provided a sort of level of dependency that validates your worth as a parent? I want to quickly shift gears, Steve, because we could talk about that topic unto itself for hours. And I mean, you went to a much deeper level than I anticipated. I should have known. Earlier on in the conversation, you talked about loss, your mother. You didn't establish a relationship. As we age, we experience loss. In our 20s, everybody's getting hooked up. They've got a girlfriend or a boyfriend. And then in their 30s and their 40s, they're getting separated, they're getting divorced. And then in our 50s and 60s, we start to have friends and loved ones who pass away. How do you handle loss?
It may sound a weird thing, but practice.
Wow.
Because I think that a sense of loss is something which I don't think it's not sort of automatic in the way that, you know, you put your hand on a hot stove and you pull your hand away kind of in an instinctive and unavoidable way. I think loss is something which is kind of created. And it's hard to express what I'm trying to say here, but I think that in order to feel loss, you have to have created a relationship, obviously. Yes. And when I say created a relationship, I do think relationships are a creative act. They're things that you construct. and that doesn't mean they don't have independence from you, but I think that relationships aren't just kind of random, and that they depend on sort of nurturing, if you like, from both sides of that relationship. And if a bit reflecting on what you're saying before, if the relationship is just one-sided, because nurturing is all in one direction, then it's not a balanced, it's not a mature relationship.
Correct.
And I think that what I know is that we talked a bit about childhood. I can't explain where this comes from or why it is, but what I do know is that I've always had an incredibly intense sense of loss.
Wow.
From very, very early age. I can remember, this is a kind of strange thing, but when I was 10, we had a French kid come to our school as a exchange with one of my friends, actually, a mate of mine. And when he first came, he was a novelty. Everybody was very interesting. But actually, after a little while, everybody got bored with him because he couldn't really speak much English. They couldn't speak any French. It was all that kind of thing. Yeah. And my French is shite, but I think that, and it's even much worse then. But there was some kind of connection that he and I created when nobody else was interested any longer, and we played kind of playground cricket, that kind of stuff, which is in itself is something for a French kid.
By the way, very quickly, Steve, for my American audience, cricket is one of the most boring games, similar to baseball, but if you actually play it, it's really fun. I grew up playing it, but anyway, that's cricket. It's a very unique sport. Go Google it, cricket.
And cricket is something which French people don't really understand because it's not part of their culture at all. And so I was literally teaching him what cricket was in this kind of very childish relationship. But when he went back to Paris, I was completely gutted.
Wow.
And I remember getting a map of Paris and poring over it, trying to find his street where he lived. There was a very intense kind of relationship that's been created in probably what was a very short time. It can't be more than probably a couple of months. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that various points in my life, I've lost relationships with people that I felt very intensely.
Wow.
And I think that you begin to recognize those feelings and begin to be able to deal and cope with them.
So and practice.
One of those strange things is that actually when I lost my parents, I was much more able to deal with that than I would have been if I hadn't had this series of practices, if I can put it that way.
Did the awareness of those losses, is that a part of the practice? It's the self-awareness, it's the heightened level of consciousness as to understanding what's going on?
Yes, and I think it's, and every time we do something for the first time, it's always pretty nerve-wracking,
Yeah.
And it's difficult, and we literally don't know what we're doing, and for most people, to be put in a position where you're kind of clueless about the rules of engagement is very worrying, very difficult, and very stressful. So actually, I kind of have developed a way of dealing with those losses because I know it wasn't a frivolous thing when I said practice. When you asked me how I think it's very profound. I think it's actually about understanding the mechanisms and sort of rhythms of loss.
Wow.
That the more you understand those, the more able you are to deal with the future one.
I love that. Very quickly, I can completely relate, by the way, that sense of loss for different reasons, but I remember going on tour with Cirque du Soleil, and each new city was exciting, and yes, what's it going to be, and all these new opportunities and new smells and new architectural wonders to marvel at, new audiences, and then each time at the end of the city, when it's the last show and you watch the tent being broken down, I always had this deep heaviness about saying goodbye. Yeah, and I never understood it, and what you just shared, I think, is going to help me maybe go back and look and understand, and how do I implement the practice that I've had. And then very quickly, you talked about the first time you do something. As a speaker, I remember the first time I ever got up in front of the stage. Glossophobia is the fear of public speaking. It's the number 2 fear after death. Can you imagine that? And I remember my knees, legs were trembling. Your very first mass sermon, when you've got to get up there in front of the congregation and deliver your first moment. What was that like? Did you pee your pants? Did you reach for the? What did you reach for? Were you like, Hail Mary, full of grace, help me out? What did you do to get yourself through that moment of first intense fear?
I had good people around me, you know, and I mean, my first mass was marred to some extent, and I have to be careful because I don't want this person to hear me say this or know that I'm saying it. But I was trained by somebody who was extremely critical. You know, everything that I did was wrong, and so he really intensified my sense of anxiety. You know, which I think was unfortunate. But I had two other people who were also ordained at the same time as I was, who helped me at the altar. And you know, obviously you have to know something about the mass to understand this bit, but my major fear was that after you consecrate the bread and the wine, there's a tabernacle sort of beyond that, where the ones that have been consecrated beforehand are, and I had to reach over this chalice of consecrated wine to unlock this thing and pull it out, and I was terrified that I would knock it over. And you know, for us kind of Catholic traditionalists, as it were, that's a massive deal. You can't just say, oh, bugger, I've just spilt it. And this is the blood of our Lord. You know, you have to do all kinds of stuff. You have to do absolutely shitting myself. And this guy just, I tell you, he said, "Don't worry, Stephen."
Is that an official? Is that an official Catholic term? I was absolutely shitting myself.
Yes, I think you'll find it's in the catechism somewhere. But but you know, he said, "I'm going to hold that chalice for you. You won't be able to knock it down." And that just calmed my nerves so much that I knew that whatever happened, that wouldn't happen. And my biggest fear was dealt with. So, yeah, sure. You know, and for the first few masses that I celebrated, you know, I just was terrified of getting it wrong.
Congratulations.
You know?
By the way, Steve, did you forgive that person, yes or no? For that pressure that they put on you?
I'm working on it.
Okay. So very quickly, before we get into my final, quick round, fast fire questions, forgiveness. Something that I struggle with. It's a topic that's come up recently in conversation. It's consistently come up in my life. I have trouble forgiving people, some people more than others. And we had this conversation. You were actually in Vegas about a year ago, and I kind of asked you this question because I really felt that I needed advice and guidance. First of all, how do you define forgiveness? What value does it bring? And how the hell do you forgive somebody who doesn't deserve being forgiven?
Well, the first thing that needs to be said is that that forgiveness as a process depends absolutely on what it is that you're trying to forgive. Yeah, I mean, you know, this guy who wasn't very nice to me, it's not actually that hard for me to forgive him because, you know, I've told him to his face that he was a bastard, and then, you know, it's dealt with in a sense, and it wasn't that big a deal. It made me feel uncomfortable, but this is not the same as some of the things which I know about that you're talking about in your life.
Well, I think other people have to forgive an abusive spouse. They have to forgive a
exactly.
narcissist partner.
So, and I think that the point, I think that forgiveness is often talked about as being something which you do for the person who's hurt you.
Well, I'm calling BS on that one because I don't grasp it, but I'm all ears. I'm listening.
Yeah, that, I mean, it's often touted as being for the benefit of the person you're forgiving. Yeah, that forgiveness is a gift to that person, when actually forgiveness is a gift to yourself.
Oh, so I've my bad, my misconception. I have trouble buying into that it's to my benefit. That's the issue that I have.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, but the benefit is a difficult word because, you know, it's not so much about being for your benefit. That sounds kind of patronizing, apart from anything else. But it's about not. The issue here is, what are the consequences of not forgiving for you, for the person who's been hurt? Yeah. And I think one of those consequences is that the hurt remains. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, the point therefore becomes: are there things that you can do that mitigate the hurt? Can't be got rid of. Things that have happened have happened.
That mitigate.
Undone, but it's about, are there things that you can do which blunt it? Yeah, don't make it disappear, but take some of the sharpness away, makes your life a bit less painful than it otherwise would be. That's what forgiveness is for. Yeah, that's in that sense. That's what I mean when I say it's for your it's a gift to yourself.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because you are the person who is suffering. The person who's done the bad thing to you isn't suffering. It might be, but in a different way, in different reasons. But that's a separate story. That's their story. But for your story, you're the person who's hurting. Yeah, and so anything which you can do, which lessens or mitigates or blunts that sense of hurt, must be good.
I love that.
That's what forgiveness is about. And you know, a lot of stuff is talked about forgiving and forgetting. You know, I can forgive, but I can't forget, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, for me, that is basically bullshit. You know, if you haven't, I don't mean forgetting in the sense of pretending it didn't happen. That's not what we mean. But forgetting in the sense of actually moving. Yeah, forgiveness is about moving something. Yeah, moving for yourself or moving for that other person. And you know, obviously, as a priest, this is a central part of one of the things which I offer.
That's why I needed to ask you.
Is you know, in the sacrament of confession, the sacrament of reconciliation, it's about, you know, if you're a religious person, if you're not, this makes no sense, of course. But if you're a religious person, then forgiveness is partly is kind of is a dual thing. On the one hand, it's the forgiveness between you and the person who's hurt you, which we talked about. But then there's also, for the religious person, for the Christian person at least, anyway, there is the putting right the relationship between you and God.
I am going to have to really do some deep soul searching and replay the words, the wisdom that you've just shared. Steve, very quickly, we're going to change energy, change gear. I've got a series of very fast questions to ask you here. What is your favorite sound? Like, for example, my favorite sound is, I love hearing, off in the distance, children playing at school, because it reminds me of innocence, purity, hope, ambition, endless possibilities. I love that sound. What's your favorite sound?
It's going to sound a bit poncy, but I love to hear a harpsichord playing something really fast.
A harpsichord playing really fast?
Harpsichord, yeah. A bit of Bach, you know, something really, I love that jangling kind of running sound.
And you know what's funny, Steve? I've been living in America now for 30 years, and there are certain words that I haven't heard since I was in England. Ponzi being one of them. Thank you for that. Thank you for that rush of nostalgia. Here's a challenging one. What is your favorite curse word or swear word?
You
can spell it out. You can just. Is it another F word? See what I did there?
Well, I've got two. One of which I know is very, very naughty, particularly in the Me Too kind of context. But cunt, I'm afraid, is probably one of my favorites.
Oh no, he didn't. So you know what's funny, Steve? That word in England is used a lot more lightly than it is in America. So I discovered this through a very painful process, because in England, the C-U-N-T word is almost like, you bastard, you son of a bitch. It's kind of this casual, everyday, slow word.
Yes.
In the United States, you can say anything. Do not say the C word. But I'm glad that
so I'm sorry if you get
Steve, there is no reason. There is no reason to apologize. And if you did want to apologize, I forgive you, sir. I forgive you.
Thank you very much.
I'm a quick study. But yes, so the C-U-N-T word in England is a common swear word. So thank you for sharing that one. This gets a little bit more deep and a little bit more profound. It has to do with legacy. So at the end of your life, what impact would you like to think that you left on the earth?
Well, I probably wouldn't have said this before this conversation, but you know, I would like to think that you're not unique. That I've you know, been of use to other people as well. You know, that would be a lovely legacy to think that people would say, that guy, you know, was a complete twat, but at least, you know,
you, sir, are
he helped me in one way or another.
But it goes back to the 7-year-old. You are born to help, care, and love. So it goes back to that. I love what you just said there. Here's the flip side of that same coin. How would you like people to remember you or think of you? You know that Steve? Blah, blah, blah.
He was all right.
Yeah, he's a good bloke, you know what I mean, mate? I love that guy. Some nice geezer. And then, I mean, I just want to say, Steve, what an honor, what a privilege to reconnect to somebody that's been so dear to my life. And this conversation, I think, will have brought a lot of value to our audience. It's brought a lot of value to me. I've got some introspection to do in regards to forgiveness. I am going to practice navigating the journey of loss. And on that note, Steve, I just want to say again, thanks for making the time. Keep doing what you do. You make the world a better place. And I love you, mate. I really do. Cheers.
I love you too, and thank you so much. It's been a privilege and a great pleasure. Thank you.
Bye, Steve. Take care, mate.
Take care. Bye-bye.